What's up, everybody? So Shadow Priest is a ton of fun to play in the Cata prepatch, and this is going to be a super informal guide on how to maximize your damage in playing it. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is what changes did Shadow Priest actually get in the prepatch. Now, some of these are not working, and I will make sure to let you know which ones aren't. So just keep that in mind as you're listening. Now, let's talk about the changes we have. 1. Shadow Word Pain scales with Haste. This is really nice and makes it a really strong dot. Number 2, dots now always last their full duration, but their tick period is reduced by haste. This is going to give us breakpoints, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about. I've put them up on the screen, but we'll talk about this a little bit later. Dots can now be refreshed early and have the final tick rolled into the next dot. Note that this is something that is not working currently. It hopefully will work before Cata actually comes out, but on the pre-patch as of, what is today, Thursday, May 2nd, it is not working. You now gain 5% main stat for wearing armor of the same type. This doesn't really affect our gearing, but now you won't have Holy Paladin stealing your Bis legs, which is awesome. Shadow Form gives 5% haste to you and everybody in your party and raid, so that's really nice. With the talent Twisted Faith, Spirit is now 1-to-1 scaling with hit rating. I mean, we never really want hit rating on gear anymore because Spirit is just better. Spirit also doesn't give us spell power anymore because the Spirit tap talent has been removed. So Spirit really is just a better version of hit rating. And finally, we have a new stat in the form of Mastery and something called Shadow Orbs. Now, Shadow Orbs have a random chance to be generated every time you deal damage with Shadow Word Pain or Mind Flay. When you do damage with Mind Blast, it's going to use these orbs, and the more orbs you have, the more damage Mind Blast is going to be done. You can cap out at 3 orbs. After you cast a Mind Blast, having had at least 1 orb, you will then get a buff called Empowered Shadows that is going to buff your dots. This has been a lot of fun to play with already, so I recommend just trying this out on a target dummy because your Mind Blast and your dots are just going to be doing a ton of damage, and it feels really, really good. Okay, now here is going to be your Bis talent setup. You have 2 points that you can kind of do whatever you want with here, but really you're taking everything that gives you damage and ignoring everything else. So that's really it. It's super simple, super straightforward. And again, those final 2 points, mana is infinite. Like I started one fight in ICC at 5k mana, and just through using my Shadow Fiend and a few Shadow Deaths, I was back up at full mana before the fight ended. So it's super easy to have mana. You don't need to worry about reducing your mana cost with the instant cast spells. So really just put those 2 points wherever you want to put them. All right, now let's get to the fun part and talk about the rotation. The rotation from Wrath of the Lich King 2 pre-patch is extremely similar. Really, the only thing that's new is the addition of our Mastery and Shadow Orbs, and Shadow Orbs are extremely important. Now, when it comes to our rotation, the most important thing is really getting a Shadow Orb. If you can start your fight with Shadow Orbs since they last 1 minute, then you are well ahead of the pack and you're gonna have an insane opener. But I'm gonna talk about this as if you don't have any Shadow Orbs and you're fishing for them in the beginning of a fight. So your precast spell 1.5 seconds before your timer is up is going to be Vampiric Touch. You're going to cast that into a Shadow Word Pain and then start spamming Mind Flay. Now, you don't want to go too long spamming Mind Flay, and I have had some ridiculously bad luck where I'm just spamming Mind Flay over and over again and not getting a Shadow Orb. Ideally, you're not casting more than 2 Mind Flays. You're getting a Shadow Orb, you're casting Mind Blast, which is giving you Empowered Shadows for that extra dot damage. You're casting Vampiric Touch into Devouring Plague, and then you just do your standard rotation. Now your standard rotation is going to be cast Mind Blast on cooldown, refresh your dots if they fall off. Now it's really important when you refresh to make sure that you have the Empowered Shadows buff active. When Shadow Word Pain gets refreshed through Mind Flay, it's going to act as if you recasted the spell, meaning there's no such thing as snapshotting anymore because every single stat is refreshed through your Mind Flay. But your Vampiric Touch and Devouring Plague are still going to snapshot on the cast. So on my character, for example, if I cast them and then immediately get an Empowered Shadows after I cast them, that's 30% dot damage that I'm missing out on, which is going to be a lot. And you want to make sure you're maximizing that uptime on your dots. So Mind Blast on cooldown, refresh your dots, cast Mind Flay as a filler, and then you're going to use Shadow Word Death in Execute. Now there are some cool things with Shadow Word Death. So Shadow Word Death is going to deal more damage to a target under 25%. And if you glyph for your Shadow Word Death, which you should because it's a really strong glyph, then you're going to get 2 Shadow Word Death casts every cooldown, essentially. So you'll cast it, you'll be able to cast it again, and then it'll go on cooldown for 12 seconds. Note that this only happens if you cast on a target that has less than 25% HP and it doesn't die. Now, we don't have a pre-patch sim, but something that's been going around the Shadow Breeze Discord is saying that it's actually not worth it to cast Shadow or Death and execute based on some version of the sim that somebody has access to. I don't know if this is correct. I'm acting as if it's not right now because I don't have any proof. It's just something that people are saying. Shadow or Death is a very fun spell to hit and execute, and I recommend you do it because just have some fun. Pre-patch isn't meant to be serious. Now let's talk about stats. What stats do you want in pre-patch? Well, with Reforging, it makes it a lot easier to acquire the stats we want because you can easily swap stats that are kind of worthless, like Spirit or Hit Rating if you're overcapped, into stats you actually want, whether that's Haste, Crit, or Mastery. So your stat weights, let's talk about them. Intellect is going to be king since this now gives spell power. That's really important, so really highest item level item is generally going to win, though obviously not always. After that, we want to make sure we're hit capped. We still have a 17% hit capped, but note that Misery and any talent that gave 3% hit, whether to your own character or as a raid buff, no longer exist. So you need 17% hit on your character sheet, which as a Shadow Priest, you probably had 14% before. So make sure you're hit capped, and then after that, you want all the haste you can get. Now, if you have an item that is haste crit, you will want to reforge all of that crit into Mastery. Mastery is going to be a really strong stat since it increases the damage of all of our dots. So after Intellect and Hit Rating, our stats are Haste, followed by Mastery, followed by Crit. Now, if you have an item with Haste or Crit on it, you cannot reforge that crit into more haste. You can only have one instance of a stat on it. So if it's already giving you haste, you can't reforge the secondary or the other secondary stat into more haste. So that's when you swap to Mastery instead on that reforge. One final thing, let's talk about races. So if you're playing Alliance, Worgen is going to be your best bet. That 1% crit and Darkflight are just rivaled by nothing. It is so good having that extra crit and the movement speed. If you don't want to play Worgen, then the next best from a pure DPS standpoint would be Draenei, followed by Human, and then Gnome or Dwarf, because either one of those doesn't really do anything. Now, Horde has an interesting choice between Troll and Goblin. From a pure DPS standpoint, Troll is going to be better on pretty much every single instance just because Berserking is such a strong cooldown, but Goblins do get 1% haste and they get Rocket Jump. Rocket Jump is something that's really hard to quantify the value of because as a Shadow Priest, we have 0 mobility. So being able to just kind of launch yourself once every minute and a half, I believe is the cooldown, is extremely useful. And again, you can't really put a DPS quality on that. You can't really put a number on it as it really depends how much time it's saving you while moving and what those globals translate to. Like if you're running and you're spamming Devouring Plague versus getting to a spot faster and doing your full rotation, you can math that out. I'm not going to, I don't know. I think personally, since I really care about progression the most, I would probably go Goblin because I don't care as much about pushing parses after progression is over. I really just care about that first week, making sure to clear the raid as quickly as possible. So in that scenario, I think Goblin is going to be better. But if you're chasing those 100 parses or those pink 99s keep evading you, then Troll is going to be your best bet there. All right, now let's talk about dots and the haste breakpoints that I mentioned earlier. This can get confusing, so try your best to understand, but honestly, if you don't, just play the same way you were in Wrath, and honestly, your dot damage is going to be perfectly fine. Now, the way dots work now is that their duration is no longer reduced by haste, but instead they tick faster, and the base duration stays roughly the same. So Vampiric Touch will always last around 15 seconds, but it might be slightly shorter, and let's talk about why. So without any haste, you're going to get 5 ticks of Vampiric Touch in a 15-second window. So it's going to tick every 3 seconds. Now let's pretend you have some haste, and instead of it ticking every 3 seconds, it's going to tick every 2.7 seconds. So on the screen, you can see how often your Vampiric Touch ticks without haste and with haste. Now in the example where a Vampiric Touch ticks every 2.7 seconds, our 5th tick occurs at 13.5 seconds, which means there's only 1.5 seconds left until that full 15-second duration, so we cannot fit another tick into that. In order for a 6th tick to fit into this window, our Vampiric Touch would have to tick every 2.5 seconds. Then the 5th tick would occur at 12.5 seconds into the duration, and our 6th tick would occur right at 15 seconds. So in this example, when Vampiric Touch ticks every 3 seconds, the full duration of the spell is 15 seconds and there are 5 ticks. When it ticks every 2.5 seconds, the full duration of the spell is 13.5 seconds and there are 5 ticks. And when Vampiric Touch ticks every 2.5 seconds, we now have 6 ticks and the spell is back to a 15-second duration. So this is why breakpoints are important, because you get extra ticks of damage, which means each cast is doing more damage because you get that extra damage from each tick. Now let's talk about Pandemic, because this is something that is supposed to be working but is not working. So Pandemic refers to the ability to recast a dot before the final tick occurs, and then the remaining duration on that first dot gets added to your next cast. So an example of this, if we go back to the Vampiric Touch that's ticking every 2.7 seconds, if we cast a second Vampiric Touch, and this lands 12.5 seconds into the first Vampiric Touch's duration, this means we had 1 second left on that first Vampiric Touch. And since our Vampiric Touch duration is 13.5 seconds, that duration of that second Vampiric Touch will be 14.5 seconds, with that first tick occurring 1 second into the duration of that second Vampiric Touch. This means our second cast of Vampiric Touch will actually have 6 ticks because it's taking the 5th tick from that first cast and adding it to the second, and then we still have the remaining 5 ticks from that second cast. Sorry, I know this can be a little bit confusing, and I hope that my explanation does it justice. This is also supposed to work with Mind Flay, where we can recast Mind Flay in between the second and third tick of damage, and that additional time on that first Mind Flay will get rolled into the second Mind Flay, essentially granting us 4 ticks of damage on that second Mind Flay. So when this all works, Shadow will feel a little bit better to play than it does now, but it still feels really good and it is a lot of fun. All right, that's all I got for you in this guide. Go have some fun, go blast some baddies in ICC, and enjoy playing Shadow Priest, because guess what? At level 85, you're going to lose all of your haste, all of your crit, and it's going to feel a lot worse. So make sure you take advantage of this fun time in pre-patch to enjoy what it's like to have incredibly ridiculous stats, because it's going to be a while till we get there again. Anyway, my name is Fanspace, and I'll see you in the next one.